Let's be honest, negotiations can be incredibly stressful. Whether you're buying a car, asking for that well deserved raise, or trying to close a massive corporate merger, the whole process just tends to fill us with anxiety. Well, welcome to our explainer on a revolutionary framework that completely overturns all that conventional wisdom about how we make deals. Today, we're unpacking Barry Nalebuff's absolute game changer of a concept from Split the Pie. You know that terrible feeling? Like you're forced to choose between being a ruthless predator or just a total pushover. We usually walk into these situations driven by two totally conflicting fears. We're terrified of losing the deal entirely, but we're equally terrified of being taken advantage of. For decades, we've basically been taught that every deal is this desperate fight for leverage. The idea is that the person with more money or a stronger market position just inherently deserves the biggest slice. And the weaker party? Well, they should just be grateful for the crumbs. But what if that entire paradigm is just mathematically wrong? What if there's a way to remove the anxiety completely? Well, we are about to explore an incredibly logical, beautifully fair alternative that honestly changes everything. So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The Great Negotiation Myth. 2. Calculating the real pie. 3. The three-step splitting rule. 4. Overcoming huge power imbalances. 5. Expanding the pie together. And finally, 6. Neutralizing bullies with logic.
All right, jumping right into section 1, the great negotiation myth, total value versus created value.
Okay, to understand why traditional negotiation methods fail so miserably, we first have to tackle the absolute biggest myth taught in business schools today, and it revolves around this acronym, BATNA. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Basically, it represents the concrete, realistic outcome that you're going to get if you just walk away from the table today. It's your safety net. Let's say you're selling your house for $500,000, and you already have a cash offer in hand from another buyer for $450,000. That $450,000, that's your BATNA. Traditional theory teaches that your power in any negotiation is directly determined by the strength of that safety net. It says if you have a strong alternative, you automatically get to demand a huge share of the deal. But here is exactly where traditional negotiations go completely off the rails. When a massive global conglomerate negotiates with a tiny startup, both sides fixate on the total deal size. They argue over who is bigger, who is stronger, who has more to lose. It turns into this classic, exhausting battle of egos. Both sides get completely blinded by who has the bigger safety net, and they entirely miss the point of why they're even meeting in the first place. Nalebuff argues this is fundamentally completely flawed. In game theory, negotiation is strictly about the incremental created value. That is the brand new value that the two parties can only create together. Value that literally neither of them could achieve on their own. Let's move on to section 2, calculating the real pie, the Alice and Bob scenario. Okay, let's look at a really simple mathematical case study that proves exactly why traditional proportional splits are inherently unfair. Let's really take our time with this one. Alice and Bob have an opportunity to partner on a project with a total deal payout of $100. Now, if they fail to reach an agreement and just walk away, Alice's BATNA gets her absolutely $0. Bob's BATNA gets him $40. I want you to put yourself in Alice's shoes for a second. Traditional logic tells you that you have absolutely zero leverage here, right? Because Bob already has $40 on his own, conventional wisdom says he should get his $40 plus half the rest, giving him $70. Or he might even demand $80 or $90 because he claims to hold all the cards while you have nothing. It literally feels like you are entirely at his mercy. But wait, here is the massive twist. What is the actual pie that Alice and Bob are creating together? Let's do the math. If they walk away, they have a combined total of $40 in the world. But if they cooperate, they generate $100. So the true pie created solely by their agreement is $100 minus that $40 combined BATNA, which equals exactly $60. Really think about that for a second. That $40, it already exists in the world. The only reason Alice and Bob are even talking to each other is to magically conjure that remaining $60 out of thin air. And because both Alice and Bob are 100% necessary to capture that new $60, neither person contributes more to its creation than the other. If Alice walks away, poof, the $60 is gone. If Bob walks away, the $60 is gone. So mathematically speaking, Alice is exactly as important as Bob in creating this new wealth. Their power to say yes is identical. Therefore, they absolutely must split this created value equally. Alice gets 30 and Bob gets 30. When you add their safety nets back to their baseline, Alice walks away with 30 and Bob walks away with 70. Notice that Bob still gets $70 total, but not because he bullied Alice based on his starting position. He gets it because he brought $40 of existing value to the table, and then they split the brand new value completely fairly.
Which brings us right into section 3, the three-step splitting rule, a bulletproof formula.
So, how do we actually do this in the real world? Well, we can turn this whole insight into a repeatable three-step formula that shifts any negotiation from an emotional battle of wills into a cool, logical exercise in fair mathematics. Step 1. Determine the concrete standalone BATNA values for both sides. Step 2. Calculate the net created pie by subtracting those standalone values from the total deal value. And Step 3. Divide that net created pie 50-50 and just add 1/2 back to each party's baseline. Burn this formula into your brain because it acts as a ridiculously powerful shield for the weaker party. It grounds the negotiation in this principled stance that naturally protects you from getting exploited.
And that leads us directly into section 4, overcoming huge power imbalances. David versus Goliath. Let's apply this to a scenario where the power imbalance is just massive. Imagine you're a small, independent contractor walking into an intimidating corporate boardroom to negotiate with a giant multinational corporation. The corporation totally tries to use their massive size to bully you, the solo freelancer. They lowball you, saying they could just hire some generic freelancer at standard market rates for way less. But here's the thing. Hiring you, this specific expert, saves the corporation costly errors, dramatically speeds up delivery, and significantly boosts their revenue. The created pie is the exact value difference between that generic freelancer and you. Let's say that unique created value is exactly $150,000. And here is the absolutely crucial point that shifts the entire power dynamic. Size does not entitle them to a disproportionate share of the new value. The freelancer isn't negotiating with the entire multi-billion-dollar corporation. They're only negotiating over this specific $150,000 bubble of value. And inside that bubble, they are absolute equals. Even if the corporation is 1,000 times larger, within the boundary of this specific project, the corporation and the contractor are equal partners in generating that $150K. This strategy completely reframes the conversation around created value rather than generic market rates. It renders company size literally irrelevant. Moving on to section 5, expanding the pie together, solving deadlocks. So what happens when you calculate the pie but the created value initially just seems way too small to make a deal worthwhile? Well, before you split the pie, you should make every single effort to bake a bigger pie. You do this by trading asymmetrical items. Take an author and a publisher who are totally deadlocked on royalty rates. The publisher might be locked in by really rigid corporate guidelines, but you know what they can easily do? They can grant the author foreign translation rights or bulk purchase discounts. Why do these asymmetrical trades work like magic? Because the publisher might be paying just cents on the dollar for bulk printing, but to the author, getting 500 free books to sell at speaking gigs, that's worth thousands. You expand the net value through these highly creative trades, and then, you guessed it, you split that newly enlarged pie equally. Now, sometimes deadlocks aren't even about value. They're about a total lack of trust, or just completely different visions of the future. Say a startup founder thinks their user base is going to skyrocket by 500%, but the investor thinks it'll only grow by a measly 20%. Instead of arguing until you're blue in the face about who has the better crystal ball, you overcome these uncertainties with contingent contracts. You basically structure a deal that automatically adapts to what actually happens tomorrow. You just write a contract that says, hey, if X happens, we split it this way. If Y happens, we split it that way. You literally let reality decide the winner. If growth hits the founder's ambitious targets, they get to retain a higher equity share. If it hits the conservative estimate, the investor gets more protection. Contingent deals allow both sides to bet on their own beliefs and objectively split the value that is actually produced in reality. Now let's tackle section 6, neutralizing bullies with logic, the ultimate test. A lot of people feared that applying this radical fairness just makes them vulnerable to ruthless negotiators who love throwing out outrageous ultimatums. But honestly, this framework is a logically bulletproof stance. When an aggressive opponent demands, say, an 80-20 split, don't respond with anger. Just calmly expose their lack of logic. Ask them, are you saying your consent is necessary for this deal to happen? They will, of course, say yes. Then ask, is my consent also necessary for this deal to happen? They literally have to say yes. Follow up by asking, well, since both our consents are equally necessary, on what principled basis should your consent be rewarded with 80% while mine is only worth 20%? You don't need to yell, you don't need to pound the table. You just calmly put the entire burden of mathematical justification squarely on their shoulders. And I guarantee you, usually, they won't have an answer.
And this logic applies beautifully to everyday personal interactions too. Consider a sibling inheritance dispute where one wants to keep the family house and the other just wants to sell it for cash. Traditionally, this is a massive emotional friction point, right? But the split the pie solution maps out the baseline, an open market sale netting $800,000, so $400,000 each. However, keeping the house in the family actually saves money. Think about it. 6% in realtor fees, thousands in staging, closing costs, maybe capital gains. That could easily be $60,000 in saved money. That $60,000 is your new pie. By accurately calculating those saved costs, you split that $30,000 each, adjust the buyout price, and boom, everyone wins financially, and more importantly, family harmony is preserved. Now, if an opponent completely refuses to engage in a principled discussion and just stubbornly continues to demand an unfair share of the pie, you have to be prepared to walk away. Walking away from an unprincipled bully is absolutely not a failure. It protects your long-term value. Remember at the very beginning when we talked about the fear of being a pushover? Walking away when someone flat out refuses basic logical fairness is the ultimate proof that you aren't one. It protects your reputation, and it ensures you do not enter toxic partnerships where your value is fundamentally disrespected. By anchoring our negotiations in radical fairness and transparent mathematics, we can completely transform the way we make deals. You no longer have to feel guilty for advocating strongly for your own interests, nor do you ever have to feel compromised by accepting unfair terms. You can stand firmly on the absolute principle that created value belongs equally to those whose cooperation makes it possible. So, here's my challenge to you. Try this in your next small negotiation, whether it's splitting chores with a roommate or buying a used car. Calculate the real pie and just watch how it completely changes the conversation. I'll leave you with this final thought. Are you ready to elevate your next negotiation from a stressful game of manipulation into a true partnership of value creation? Take these steps, figure out the real pie, and start splitting it right down the middle. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.